answer questions on his behalf.
Thanks, Prime Minister. We move then to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the night before the election, somebody was interviewed on SBS and made the following statement: no cuts to education, no cuts to health, no change to pensions, no change to the GST and no cuts to the ABC or SBS. Now, Prime Minister, no one will now own up to making that statement. Does the Prime Minister have any idea who said this?
I call the Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker,
We'll have some silence. Prime Minister will resume his seat. Now, we've had a question asked. We will now be silenced while we listen to the answer. Prime Minister has the call, and that includes the member for Wakefield, unless he wants to leave straight away. Choice is yours. The Prime Minister has the call.
well, Madam,
And if the member for Jagga Jagga wants to be first out, she'll keep it up too. Prime Minister has the call.
Madam Speaker, of course I made that statement. Of course I made that statement. But Madam Speaker,
And if there's any more of that clapping, those people who clap will leave.
but Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker,
There will be silence for the question to be answered. And that includes the member for Chifley.
Madam
Prime Minister has the
Speaker,
call.
members opposite claimed that the deficit was going to be $30 billion at that time. That's what they claimed. And of course it came in at closer to $50 billion. So, Madam Speaker, under circumstances like that,
Those I know it's near the end of the year, but we have 2 weeks of this. So both sides of the House will stop the chit-chat across the chamber and we will hear the answer of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, under the circumstances that we subsequently found ourselves in, it was important to make sensible savings, and that's exactly what we are doing. Why is it
The member
fair?
for Batman will leave
why
under
is it fair
94A.
to exclude the ABC from the kind of
And the member for
efficiency
Parliamentary will join
savings
him under
that
94A.
every other government entity is subject to? And, Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition asks who said what. Well, Madam Speaker, who was it? Who was it who was asked yesterday? You can't criticise, though, if you're not in a position to say that you would reverse the cuts if you were in the same position. Who was asked that, Madam Speaker? Who was asked that, Madam Speaker? And after a whole lot of
The member for
obfuscation,
Griffith.
someone was asked, would
And the
you
member for
reverse the
Sydney will
cuts if
desist.
you took office? Who was that? Who was that, Madam Speaker? Did someone say backstabber bill? No one could have said that because that would have been out of order. But, Madam Speaker, what does he say? What does he say? He says, we don't think the cuts need to be as deep as they are. That's what he said. So, Madam Speaker, what a hypocrite, what a fraud.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The Manager of Opposition on a point of order, which had better be a proper one.
No, it is. It is. In the management of the House, the technicians don't turn off the microphone until you give somebody the call. You have consistently refused to give the call on any point of order until you think the Prime Minister might have finished, and then you give the call. It makes the concept of raising a point of order irrelevant.
There's no point of order. I call the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister inform the House how the Australia-China Free Trade Agreement will boost growth and create jobs in the red meat and livestock sector including in my electorate of Capricornia?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, it's great to have a question from the member for Capricornia, the beef capital of Australia, that I was pleased to visit just the other day. Now, Madam Speaker, this government has delivered over the past 12 months. The carbon tax is gone. That's a saving of $550 for the average Australian household. We've all but stopped the boats, and that means that lives are being saved. We're building the roads of the 21st century, Madam Speaker, and that is giving the people of Australia who would otherwise be stuck in traffic jams their lives back. And, Madam Speaker, we are getting the budget back under control because that means that taxes can be cut. But, Madam Speaker, almost nothing that this government has done will make as much difference for the long-term future of our country as the Australia-China Free Trade Agreement. Again, I congratulate the Minister for Trade and Investment for his extraordinary work. But, Madam Speaker, this Free Trade Agreement, it will be good for jobs, it will be good for consumers, it will be good for growth. It sets our country up for the future. Madam Speaker, the Howard government started it and the Abbott government has delivered it, Madam Speaker. Good for jobs, good for consumers and good for our exports. Now, Madam Speaker, the OECD says that beef will become the fastest growing import into China because, Madam Speaker, as China becomes more middle class, its diet will become more middle class. And, Madam Speaker, under the Free Trade Agreement, beef tariffs, currently up to 25%, will, when it's fully implemented, drop to zero. The 12% tariff on beef offal will be entirely gone. Sheep meat tariffs of up to 23%, they'll be gone too. And, Madam Speaker, the 10% tariff on live cattle exports to China, that will be gone as well once the Free Trade Agreement is fully implemented. It's no wonder, Madam Speaker, that Meat and Livestock Australia has said the Australian red meat and livestock sectors will benefit by $11 billion from the elimination of tariffs negotiated under the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. All these people shouting, you'd think they'd be pleased. You'd think they'd be pleased, Madam Speaker. The Meat and Livestock Australia said few other initiatives pursued by the Australian government could do more to improve supply chain returns
on my left,
than
particularly
a
the member
true
for
free
Hotham.
trade agreement with China. Well, Madam Speaker, I guess all this shouting means that members opposite are against it. That's the only conclusion we can come to. But, Madam Speaker, trade means jobs. Freer trade means more jobs. That's why free trade agreements are at the heart of our agenda for a strong and prosperous economy.
It is impossible to hear answers being given in this place with this cacophony coming from my left. It is to cease. And if it means a whole lot of people have to be removed in order for that to happen, so be it. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer the Prime Minister to his previous answer, in which he blamed the state of the budget for breaking his promises about the ABC. Does the Prime Minister recall saying in answer to the following question on the 13th of August last year, will the condition of the budget be an excuse for breaking promises? Tony Abbott, exactly right. We will keep the commitments that we make.
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Fix the budget deficit.
Madam Speaker,
The Treasurer will desist, as will the Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition says that we had PFO. Well, Madam Speaker, they said that the deficit would be $30 billion. It turned out to be closer to $50 billion. So under the circumstances under which we now find ourselves, it is necessary for the ABC to face the kind of savings search which every other part of government is subject to. Now, Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition thinks there's something wrong with finding savings in the ABC? Well,
The
Madam
Leader of the
Speaker,
Opposition has asked his question and will assist, and the member for Moreton is warned.
who said yesterday, we don't think the cuts need to be as deep as they are? Who said yesterday we wouldn't be making the same
The Prime
cuts?
Minister will resume his seat, and the member for Jagga will leave under 94A. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Madam Speaker,
Better
on
be
direct
better than the
relevance,
last
there
one.
is no way the material the Prime Minister has just turned to can be directly relevant to the question that was asked.
There's no point of order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Madam Speaker, this is someone who Julia Gillard couldn't trust, someone who Kevin Rudd couldn't trust, and now he wants to make trust an issue. Well, I tell you what, Madam Speaker, the act of faith
Prime Minister will
I
resume his
made
seat.
with the
Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Isaacs on a point of order. We've already had one on relevance.
It's only question 2.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yeah. We don't doubt about you, Pete. We know what you're like.
You've got the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The point of order is under Standing Order 91C. We are seeing willful disregard of the standing
member will
orders
resume his seat.
by...
The Prime Minister has the call.
Madam Speaker, this is an important question and it's an important issue. And when the budget situation deteriorates from what Labor said was a $30 billion deficit to what turned out to be closer to a $50 billion deficit, obviously government has to respond accordingly. And all we are doing, Madam Speaker, is applying to the ABC the same kind of search for efficiencies that have been applied to every other part of government. And what the Leader of the Opposition is trying to suggest,
The member for Sydney is
that the ABC should be a protected species. Wrong. Wrong. The Leader of the
member for
Opposition
Moreton
is
will leave
trying
under
to suggest
94A.
that the ABC should be a protected species, but he's not even straight about that, Madam Speaker. He's not even straight about that, because when he was asked yesterday, would you reverse the cuts if you took office, we don't think the cuts need to be as deep as they are.
So what should they be, Bill?
So tell us, just what should be cut? What should be cut? And when he was put on the spot, Madam Speaker, he says, we wouldn't be making the same extent of cuts to the ABC, so there's the difference. Well, what cuts would the Leader of the Opposition be making? If the Leader of the Opposition does not like the savings that the government is proposing, if he wants to be fair dinkum, if he wants to avoid the charge of hypocrisy or even fraud, he should tell us exactly what he has in mind.
Tell us now.
I call the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I just want to table the Prime Minister's hypocrisy, the Prime
There is
Minister's
no
lack
point.
of fair dinkumness.
That can't be a serious question to table anything. It's impossible to table a concept. I call the Honourable Member for Higgins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Extraordinary Minister for Trade and Investment. Will the Minister outline to the House the types of opportunities that will open up Australian businesses, services and investors in China as a result of the landmark Australia-China Free Trade Agreement?
Well, I hope the Extraordinary Minister for Trade and Investment heard the question, because I didn't. You can repeat the question.
Thank you, Madam
And there'll be
Speaker.
silence as we listen to it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the fantastic Minister for Trade and Investment. Will the Minister outline to the House the types of opportunities that will open up for Australian businesses, services and investors in China as a result of the landmark Australia-China Free Trade Agreement?
I call the Honourable Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Higgins and congratulate her on her chairmanship of a very important foreign investment inquiry.
The member
Madam
for
Speaker,
Wakefield, one more utterance and you're
since the
gone.
First Fleet, Australia has relied heavily on foreign investment to drive growth and jobs. However, recently, one criticism of important Chinese investment is that it is all one way, that Australian companies can't invest in China. The free trade agreement concluded last week has seriously begun a process to change all that. Madam Speaker, of course, in industrial areas, 100% Australian ownership and investment has been possible for some time. For example, BlueScope Steel has got 8 wholly owned Australian companies, factories across China in Colorbond and doing very well. Importantly, however, the free trade agreement opened up such investment opportunities to a wide range of services where Australia excels. For example, Australian aged care companies will be able to establish one or many aged care homes, own 100% of these profit-making facilities, and take key members of their staff with them under the reciprocal labour arrangements that have been agreed. Similarly, Australian private hospital owners will be able to construct, fully own and operate hospitals across China and also qualify to take advantage of the reciprocal labour mobility agreement. Wholly owned Australian telecommunications companies will be able to supply Chinese domestic multi-party services as well as participation in joint ventures with up to 55% equity to supply online data and transaction processing services. The wholly owned Australian provision of restaurant and hotel owners, travel agencies and tour operators, contract manufacturing services covering a very wide range of manufactured products, and Australian construction companies will be exempted from business scope restrictions, allowing them to undertake a wider range of commercially meaningful projects. Madam Speaker, as well, Australian insurance providers will be able to enter the market for motor vehicle insurance, a very lucrative market in China. And, Madam Speaker, there are a raft of other restrictions across the financial services sector being given first-mover advantage to Australian financial services companies. This is an agreement that will drive a huge transition in the export of Australian services, creating many, many jobs and serious growth for generations of Australians.
I call the honourable member for Adelaide, Port Adelaide.
Close but no cigar.
Flaxland. You swap seats.
Madam Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. This morning, not yet, he's not Prime Minister yet, but he's getting close. This morning, the member for Grey referred to the Prime Minister's now infamous promise of no cuts to the ABC and SBS. And he said, "That's not the greatest piece of footage I've seen." The Prime Minister would wish he hadn't made that exact statement. Does the Prime Minister agree with the member for Grey, and does he now wish he never made that exact statement?
I call the honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, I dare say the member for Lilly wishes he hadn't said the 4 years of surpluses I announced tonight. The 4 years of surpluses I announced tonight. Madam Speaker, I wish that a deficit which the Labor Party said was $30 billion had not blown out to almost $50 billion. That's what I wish. That's what I wish. I wish it didn't fall to me and this government to tackle 6 years of debt and deficit disaster from members opposite. That's what I wish. I wish that the Leader of the Opposition was more trustworthy. That's what I wish. There are lots of things I wish for, but above all else, Madam Speaker—
The member for Charlton.
But above all else, Madam Speaker, I wish that members opposite had the character and courage of some of their predecessors, like Bob Hawke and decent Labor leaders. That's what I wish. But, Madam Speaker,
there's too much noise on my right as well.
As for my good friend, the member for Grey, well, he and I are pretty always on a unity ticket, and I can certainly agree with him.
I call the Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, the member for Lily's behaviour during that answer was utterly appalling. He called the Prime Minister every name under the sun, and he should be required to withdraw it. He should be required to withdraw the unparliamentary statements that he made.
The member for Chisholm on the same point of order.
Same point of order. If the Leader of the House is going to point to people's behaviour on this side, then maybe he should look at his colleagues' behaviour on the front bench as well. That this, as you well know, was a two-way street, and maybe the member for Dixon might want to out himself as well for his appalling behaviour during that.
I have to say, if there was the word, I have to say that a further member of the in the chamber indicated unparliamentary language on the part of the member for Lilly. Did the member for the minister for? Then I think the answer is the member for Lilly will withdraw. We'll deal first with the member for Lilly.
I withdraw.
He withdraws. I would ask the Minister for Health says he said nothing unparliamentary. Look, enough is enough. If the Minister for Health would simply say to the House that he will always conform with the standing orders, that would be a good start.
Madam Speaker, in your presence I'll always do my best.
The member for Indi has the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. The agriculture sector relies on programs such as the ABC Bush Telegraph to connect, inform, educate and prosper. For the sector to take advantage of the economic opportunities that will exist under the recent free trade agreements, producers, manufacturers and city-based distributors need to connect and be connected around Australia. Minister, would you please ask the ABC Board to consider the needs of regional Australia when developing programs to replace Bush Telegraph?
I call the Honourable the Minister for Agriculture.
Well, I thank the honourable member for a question, and note obviously that the ABC is an integral part of regional Australia, and of course the ABC, like every other department, has had to deal, Madam Speaker, with the curse of the Labor Party and the curse that was delivered to us by a budget which last time the member for Lilly uttered the words, he apparently told us there was going to be an $18 billion deficit, an $18,000 million deficit, which is rather quite extraordinary. What we actually got delivered was a $48 billion deficit, a $48,000 million deficit. And by reason of that, of course, there have been pressures all through the budget. But it was brought about by those who sit opposite. It was brought about by them. Of course, if they were able to manage the economy, then we wouldn't have to be dealing with these issues. But we are dealing with these issues, and I apologise on their behalf to the member for Indi for the appalling management of the other side. And of course that we will stay in close negotiation with Mr Scott. Mr Scott has full responsibility for what happens in regards how he deals with the cuts brought about by an appalling Labor economic management, and we will do our very best to make sure that the best outcomes are found for regional people, despite this appalling management that was a curse of the previous government led by the member for Lilly and ably assisted by all those opposite.
I call the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry. Would the minister inform the House of the benefits to the Australian resource industry of the Australia-China Free Trade Agreement?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and can I thank the hard-working member for Boothby for his question and thank him for his strong and steady commitment to the resource industry in South Australia. He knows, as most people in this chamber, perhaps not so many on that side, but certainly everyone on this side, knows that a strong and growing resource sector is an important part of having a strong and growing economy providing jobs, particularly in his state of South Australia. Now, Madam Speaker, the historic China FTA builds on the back of the Korea and Japan FTAs, and I have to congratulate, in fact I want to congratulate the fantastic Minister for Trade for what he's done with these. He's done in a year what that side couldn't do in 6. In fact, in these first months he did more than they did in 6. He got one away almost straight up. And since then, of course, Madam Speaker, he's completed the trifecta. And, Madam Speaker, the burden of tariffs on the Australian resources products, including iron ore, coal, copper, aluminium, zinc, nickel and uranium, will now be eliminated as a result of the successful negotiation of the China FTA. The 3% tariff on coking coal and all remaining minerals commodity tariffs will be immediately eliminated, and the 6% tariff on thermal coal will be gone within 2 years. An absolutely fantastic effort, but most importantly an effort that will create greater viability for those industries in Australia, and that means greater job security. Madam Speaker, on full implementation, all resource exports will enter China duty-free. Incredible access for an industry that exports $75 billion worth of minerals and $10 billion worth of energy commodities annually to China. Madam Speaker, this incredible access is welcome news for many Australian leading resource companies such as BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, Fortescue, Newcrest and Woodside. And, Madam Speaker, the news has also been very welcomed by organisations such as the Minerals Council, and the Minerals Council described the agreement as a watershed achievement in Australia's relationship with China, which will eliminate tariffs that add nearly $590 million in cost to the bilateral minerals and energy trade. And the Australian Mines and Metals Association also, in a similar vein, said that the FTA will strengthen our bilateral engagement with China and provide further momentum for the resource industry to drive the Australian economy and create jobs and improve living standards. And that is what good government is about. Coming up to the end of our first year in office, Madam Speaker, can I say that along with FTAs, along with the FTA, we scrapped the mining tax and the carbon tax.
Time has elapsed. I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the night before the election, the Prime Minister promised there'd be no cuts to the ABC. We now know that's not true. Morwell's regional radio post shut, the Bush Telegraph silenced, the Victorian edition of the 7:30 report cut. How many Victorians will lose their jobs because of the Prime Minister's broken promise?
Are you going to restore it? Yeah. Are you going to restore it?
The member for Griffith is warned.
Madam Speaker, how can the Leader of the Opposition be complaining when he supports the cuts? He supports cuts. Madam Speaker, he was asked yesterday, would you reverse the cuts if you took office? And he said, we don't think the cuts need to be as deep as they are. So what is your...
I suspect the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, in this question time, under direct relevance, the Prime Minister's been allowed to throw any abuse he wants at the questioner.
That's what you've allowed. The member will resume his seat. In the question of abuse, there's more than enough of it in this chamber today. The Prime Minister has the call.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition just said across the table, you'll find out where our cuts are when we come to government. That's exactly what he said. You'll find out what our cuts are when we come to government. What arrogance! What incredible arrogance! Now, Madam Speaker, he was asked yesterday, would you reverse the cuts if you took office?
The member for Ballarat.
And he says, we don't think the cuts need to be as deep as they are. So why is it Why is it that this Leader of the Opposition supports cuts but won't tell us what they should be? Well, Madam Speaker,
Prime Minister, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition does not give instructions in this chamber. I do. Now you have the call.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. On a point of order, this Prime Minister is now lying about lying.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition will withdraw. The Leader of the House did not have the call. The Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of Government Business.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy for the Opposition to withdraw, but the Prime Minister simply repeated what the Leader of the Opposition had said, which is that we'll find out when we come to government. That's what he said about the cuts that Labor would make. You'll find out when we come to government. Now, he slipped up. He should be man enough to admit it, and he should withdraw the allegation he made against the Prime Minister.
The Leader of the Opposition has the call and will withdraw what he said.
I'll withdraw.
Prime Minister has the call.
So Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, he supports cuts because that's what he said to ABC Radio, but he won't tell us what they are.
The Manager of Opposition resume his seat.
So what's going on here, Madam Speaker? The truth is that the Leader of the Opposition is simply untrustworthy, as his former colleague Craig Emerson said.
The Manager of the member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would again ask you to enforce the standing orders. And under 91C, we have willful disregard by the Prime Minister of the standing orders,
Not correct.
who has not
The member will
attempted
resume his
relevance.
seat. We've already had a point on relevance. Prime Minister has the call.
Madam Speaker, Craig Emerson, the former member for Rankin, talking about the Leader of the Opposition, I'm quoting from Paul Kelly's book, he was telling both camps what they wanted to hear. And Kelly went on to say the distrust between Rudd and Shorten was intense.
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, I just asked how many Victorians are going to lose their jobs.
The member has
the Prime Minister has not
seat.
been.
We'll have silence on my right, including from the member for Corangamite. Well, the Prime Minister has the call and we'll have silence to hear the answer.
Madam Speaker, all through question time today and yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition has been talking about trust.
The member
and
for Isaac will
I'm talking
leave under
about trust.
94A.
And this is what Paul Kelly said about the Leader of the Opposition. The distrust between Rudd and Shorten was intense and enduring. The Gillard camp was contemptuous of Shorten, considering him weak and duplicitous. Neither side trusted him and neither side revised his view. Well, Madam Speaker, if Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard couldn't trust Bill Shorten, neither can the Australian people.
I call the honourable member for Barker, but before he begins his question, we'll have silence. Member for Barker has the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Agriculture. Will the Minister outline to the House what the historic Australia-China Free Trade Agreement will mean for our horticultural and viticultural industries, and particularly in my seat of Barker?
I call the Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I'd like to
thank the member for Barker for his question, a member who is right at the epicentre of the horticultural industry, the biggest citrus-growing area. He's invited me down there to Mount Gambier to see the livestock selling centres. He also has the Murray land and the Riverland. But of course, what it is about the seat of Barker, it is the area where you can turn water into wine. And we must remember that's where the Barossa is from, and obviously Coonawarra. And it's good to be able to inform the people from the seat of Barker about some of the benefits that have been brought about by the great work of the Trade Minister. We're all endorsing the work of the Trade Minister. Oranges from that seat, Madam Speaker, the tariff on them will go from 11% down to 0 over 8 years. So the people in China get the capacity to enjoy our oranges from the seat of Barker. We'll have grapefruit that'll go from 12% down to 0 over 8 years. And that's good work by the Trade Minister, and the people of Barker can supply that product. Lemons and limes go from 11% down to 0. And I'll once more commend the Minister for Trade and the great work that he's done to help the people from Barker. Grapes, fresh and dried, 11 to 13%, down to 0. And of course, I'm very happy to see the almond company there in Renmark and the great work they've done, one of our fastest growing exports. And of course, the tariffs are being reduced on them down to 0, to try and grow our economy, to make sure that more money goes back through the farm gate, to make sure that the mums and dads who suffered under the previous government actually start getting a fair return. But it's also in the wine industry. I'm happy to see that in the wine industry, we've got the tariff on wine less than 2 litres going from 14% down to 0, over 4 to 5 years. Wine greater than 2 litres from 20% down to 0, over 4 years. Spirits and liqueurs from 10% down to 0. Now, you could have actually guessed that this was going to be a good outcome because Chile got a free trade agreement back in 2006. And they've had a seven-fold increase in their wine exports, And you think that any person who was wise would have been able to look across the Pacific and say, well, we should do what they're doing. But what were we doing instead of looking across the Pacific? Well, what we had was the Labor Party involved in this nefarious imbroglio of the Labor Party leadership, which has been ably discussed by the Prime Minister, where they've been chopping and changing between leaders. Instead of looking at Chile, they looked at the East Timor solution, where they forgot to tell East Timor about it. Instead of looking across at Chile and seeing what they were doing, they had the computer in schools with a $1.4 billion blowout. Instead of looking across at Chile to see what they were doing, so we'd get a better return to our farmers, no, they're worried about set-top boxes. Remember that? $350 for a set-top box. You could buy it at Harvey Norman for $168. No, they weren't looking across the Pacific. They were just looking at themselves.
I call the honourable member for Sydney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, referring to the Prime Minister's cuts to the ABC, Senator Abetz said, and I quote, "Nobody has lost their job." Prime Minister, with the announcement yesterday that 400 ABC staff would lose their jobs, how can the government continue to deny that its broken promises are hurting Australians?
I call the honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, obviously I deeply regret the fact that changes which the ABC management have made will produce job reductions. I deeply regret that. But, Madam Speaker, if the Deputy Leader of the Opposition was as concerned about jobs as she says she is, or as she claims to be, why don't they support the East-West Link in Melbourne? There's 7,000 jobs in the East-West Link, and, Madam Speaker, members opposite want to rip up the contract. That's what I do. That's what they want to do. There's 7,000 jobs in the East-West Link, and members opposite support Dan Andrews in wanting to rip up those contracts. So, Madam Speaker, if they're fair income, they should tell Dan Andrews to keep the contracts and keep the jobs.
And if the manager of opposition business is going to ask a question on relevance, it was quite relevant, as the question was about jobs. Now resume his seat.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. Point of order, Madam Speaker.
The manager of opposition business?
I still have the right to raise the point of order.
Not unless I don't think it's relevant.
Madam Speaker, are we now at the point? Are we now at the point? Do I have the call? Are we now at the point, Madam Speaker, where if a question is asked about ABC jobs, any job in the nation other than ABC is suddenly relevant to the question? Because that makes question time irrelevant.
The member will resume his seat. And if he reads the practice, he will find there is provision for there if it is anticipated that a point of order is going to be one which is not helpful to the cause. It does not have to be taken. I would refer you to the practice. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer, and I call the honourable member for Cowan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House the economic importance of the successful float of Medibank Private that occurred at midday today?
I call the honourable Treasurer.
Good question. Well, I thank the honourable member for Cowan for his question, and I note today we took another step forward on delivering our economic action strategy
for a stronger and more prosperous Australia. The Medibank private float is the third biggest initial public offer share listing in the world this year, and we have delivered it in Australia. It is a core policy principle of the coalition that we as a government should stick to our knitting, that we should be focused on delivering essential services for the community, and when the government owns a business, that business should be set free to compete in the marketplace. Medibank Private competes with over 34 other funds in private health insurance, and it has been a long-standing policy of the coalition that this is not a business that government should be involved with. Now, let us remember, every year under Labor, they would dig deep into Medibank Private, raid the assets of Medibank Private to try and fatten up their budget. And they did it each year in a more desperate plea to try and deliver the surplus they actually never delivered. Our view has been that this entity should be able to properly serve the best interests of its 1.2 million policyholders. It should properly serve the interests of the Australian people by focusing on the job that it must do, especially in competition with 34 other players. Well, at 12 o'clock today, 400,000 Australians became direct shareholders in Medibank Private, and they received, on the listing price, a 10% benefit for backing Medibank Private. That is a reward for their enterprise in investing in the initial public offer. And indeed, millions of other Australians have become instant shareholders in Medibank Private through their superannuation, and in particular through self-managed superannuation. This is what we are about: fixing the budget, fixing the economy, strengthening the enterprise of the Australian people. What is particularly pleasing is that every dollar that is raised by the government in the sale of Medibank Private today is going to go back into new productive infrastructure in the Australian community. So when Mike Baird announces new harbour crossings in Sydney, that has helped to be funded by the Medibank Private sale today, because we are recycling asset values. Now, the sad thing is the Labor Party is opposing all this. They're opposing everything we are doing to try and strengthen the Australian economy. They are opposing the privatisation of Medibank Private. It is my colleague, Matthias Cormann, who's done an outstanding job on this, ably supported by the people of Australia.
I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's shameful decision to cut the real pay, Christmas leave and recreational leave of Australian Defence Force personnel. Will the Prime Minister finally do what Labor has been calling for and reverse his disgraceful decision to cut the pay and conditions of our Defence Forces?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker,
The member for Griffith has been warned.
Madam Speaker, obviously, it would be better if we were able to pay the courageous and highly professional members of our Defence Forces more. It would be better if we could do that. But, Madam Speaker, when we are trying to deal with a debt and deficit disaster that members opposite created, it is impossible to pay everyone all that we would like. It is impossible. So, Madam Speaker, as always, we are keeping these matters under close review. But the fact is, Madam Speaker, that we cannot pay people everything that we would like to pay. We cannot pay people everything that they deserve when we have a situation, thanks to members opposite, of $50 billion a year deficits as opposed to $20 billion a year surpluses when the coalition was last in government. And, Madam Speaker, before members opposite wax too sanctimonious and self-righteous about defence, let's never forget that they cut $16 billion out of defence. Let's never forget that Labor reduced defence spending as a percentage of GDP to the lowest level since 1938. That's what they did. And Madam Speaker, while I'm on the subject of trust, let's not forget Members opposite know how untrustworthy the Leader of the Opposition is, and I am doing the people of Australia a service by letting them know what this Leader of the Opposition is really like. And again, I'm quoting Paul Kelly: the distrust between Rudd and Shorten was intense and enduring. The Gillard camp was contemptuous of Shorten, considering him weak and duplicitous.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Madam Speaker, under direct relevance, there is no precedent ever for this sort of material to be considered directly relevant to a question of this nature.
You can't even talk about...
And when we're talking about Defence Force pay of
The member
all
will
issues...
resume his seat. The member will resume his seat. The question was a general question asked about pay cuts, and the Prime Minister has the call. I will listen to his answer.
Madam Speaker, like all of the questions that the Leader of the Opposition asks, it's essentially about trust and it's essentially about honesty, and his trust and honesty is an important issue for this parliament to consider, and this parliament needs to know what his colleagues think of him. The distrust between Rudd and Shorten was intense and enduring. The Gillard camp was contemptuous of Shorten, considering him weak and duplicitous. Neither side trusted him, and neither side revised its view. Madam Speaker, this is a Leader of the Opposition whose colleagues do not trust him, and if he's not trusted by his own colleagues, he should never be trusted by the people of Australia.
I call the honourable member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer, and I remind the Treasurer that it will take a person driving home from work in Melbourne tonight over an hour to get from CityLink to the Eastern Freeway. How will the government cut travel times and improve
productivity? The member
productivity
for Newcastle is not in her seat, may not speak at all.
Madam Speaker, I might repeat the question if that's
Yes,
okay.
you may repeat the question.
My question is to the Treasurer, and I remind the Treasurer that it will take a person driving home from work in Melbourne tonight over an hour to get from CityLink to the Eastern Freeway.
The member for Perth will leave under 94A. The member for Perth
How
will
will the
leave under
government cut
94A.
travel times and improve productivity through building the infrastructure of the 21st century, such as the East-West link? And are there any risks to these reforms going ahead?
Well, I would ask the Treasurer, did he hear the call? I call the Treasurer resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Madam Speaker, under the rules for questions Standing Order 100, it is clearly ironical to ask the Treasurer about someone driving a car. Clearly. There's no way
The member will
this is in
resume
order.
his seat or he will leave under 94A. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it is a very important question that obviously the Labor Party don't like. Let me come to the point. Currently, around 200,000 vehicles make cross-city journeys through the north of Melbourne each day. That's expected to double within the next 2 decades. Currently, independent studies show that a journey across Melbourne from the Eastern Freeway through Alexandra Parade and across to CityLink can take up to 63 minutes each way. On average, 41 minutes. Under the deal that we have done with the Napthine government, under the deal that we have done to build East-West Link, we are going to cut that from a potential 63 minutes each way to 10 minutes each way, bypassing 23 sets of traffic lights. 23 sets of traffic lights. Now, let me be very clear. Let me be very clear. It is only the coalition government in Victoria that is going to deliver East-West Link. It is only the coalition government in Victoria that is going to cut up to 2 hours of travel time each day to just 20 minutes. To just 20 minutes, and it is a partnership between the Infrastructure Prime Minister and the Coalition Premier of Victoria. Now, what is the risk? The risk is that Labor is elected in Victoria on Saturday. The risk to 7,000 jobs in Victoria on Saturday is a vote for the Labor Party. So the only way to deliver 7,000 new jobs in Victoria under the East-West link is to vote for the coalition. And if the Labor Party is elected on Saturday, not only will Victorians lose out on the $3 billion that the Commonwealth Government has specifically allocated to East-West Link, not only will they lose out on that $3 billion, they will also face a bill of over $1 billion in compensation to be paid to builders for a road that was never built. This is what the Labor Party is about. They are wreckers. They are wreckers. And nothing illustrates it more than the determination of the Labor Party in Victoria to stop 7,000 jobs, to cost Victoria East-West Link, to cost Victoria $3 billion of Commonwealth funding, to cost Victoria over $1 billion in compensation for builders, and to cost Victoria the chance to be a more productive economy. I say to the people of Victoria, if you care about jobs, if you care about your economy, vote for the coalition on Saturday.
Before I call the Leader of the Opposition, I have to advise that we have with us today a senior delegation attending the 4th Annual China Advanced Leadership Program of the Australia and New Zealand School of Government, led by Secretary Tong. We also have with us Mr Carl O'Callaghan, the Police Commissioner of Western Australia, and on this day, White Ribbon Day, I make him particularly welcome. I call the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's remarks at the 50th anniversary of the Australian newspaper, where he said, "No paper more closely corresponds with the true spirit of Australia." Does the Prime Minister therefore agree with the judgment of the Weekend Australian that said that his leadership is languishing, flaky and insipid?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, if
the member for Wakefield,
if the Leader of the Opposition wants to quote the Australian editorial at me, why don't I quote Paul Kelly at him? I mean, really and truly, Paul Kelly is the prince of political historians. He is the most distinguished journalist historian in recent Australian history, and if the Leader of the Opposition wants to quote deprecating editorials, let me yet again quote, "The distrust between Shorten and Rudd was intense and enduring. The Gillard camp was contemptuous of Shorten, considering him weak and duplicitous. Neither side trusted him and neither side revised its view." Well, that's the point, Madam Speaker. Neither side revised its view, and I am very confident that the Australian editorialist will revise his view.
I call the Honourable Member for Corangamite.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education, representing the Minister for Employment. Will the Minister inform the House how the government plans to restore the rule of law to our construction industry? What other views have been expressed that create obstacles to that goal?
I call the Honourable the Minister for Education, representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the member for Corangamite for her question, because it gives me the opportunity to remind the people of Australia and the House that under the Howard government, the then Minister for Workplace Relations, now the Prime Minister, ensured that there was a tough cop on the industrial beat through the establishment of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. That led to some very practical outcomes, Madam Speaker. One of those was that it saved the Australian consumers $7.5 billion. It also increased productivity in building and construction by 17% after it was introduced. Under the current Leader of the Opposition, who was then the weak and duplicitous Workplace Relations Minister, he reversed these changes. He reversed the Australian Building and Construction Commission. It was scrapped. he introduced the Fair Work Building and Construction Division, which had less power and less money. And he brought the CFMEU back into the Cabinet room and gave them a seat at the table of Cabinet. In Victoria, Madam Speaker, even worse than the current Leader of the Opposition here in Australia, the Leader of the Opposition in Victoria has proposed ripping up the Victorian Building Code. He wants to tear up, here they're saying, here the socialist left is saying, Madam Speaker, he wants to tear up the building code in Victoria. Now, a very respectable Australian, no less than the former Royal Commissioner into the building and construction industry, Terence Cole, he said about this idea, Madam Speaker, and I quote, "Only a political party enthralled to the building unions would contemplating abolishing a state's building code. Only a political party enthralled to the building unions would contemplate abolishing a state's building code." And that is exactly what Daniel Andrews proposes to do if he is elected Premier on Saturday in Victoria. The CFMEU will be back at the Cabinet table in Victoria, back running the state of Victoria, because a vote for the Australian Labor Party on Saturday is a vote for the CFMEU. But even worse than that, Madam Speaker, a vote for Daniel Andrews is a vote for John Setka to be back at the Cabinet table in Victoria. John Setka, the State Secretary of the CFMEU, if Labor wins on Saturday, John Setka and the CFMEU will be telling Daniel Andrews and the Victorian Labor Party, and Laurie Ferguson's nodding his head, that's what he wants to see happen. He wants the CFMEU back running Victoria, but Victorians, they don't want it. They've had 4 years of industrial peace in that state. They don't want the bikies back running Victoria. A vote for Labor on Saturday is a vote for the CFMEU and John Setka.
I call the honourable member for McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. A few weeks ago, while standing next to the Treasurer, the Finance Minister said, "We are taking responsibility and we will stand by how we perform against our forecasts." Will the Treasurer be taking responsibility for his government's performance in his upcoming budget update, or will the Treasurer be blaming a revenue problem, Labor, or both?
I call the honourable the Treasurer.
Treasurer, you said it was $30 billion.
I'll be blaming both. I'll be blaming both. Because Labor is responsible. Labor is responsible. Oh, God.
Swanee's gone pale.
You know,
The member for Wakefield has gone too far and will leave under 94A.
I look at old Swanee up there and he's shaking his head at the behaviour of the member for McMahon. And I can understand why, Swanee. I mean, the best thing about the member for McMahon is he makes Swanee look good, right? That's the best thing about him. And, of course, the Labor Party promised surpluses. In fact, it was the member for McMahon who stood at this dispatch box with a great history of commitments. Great history of commitments. I've been waiting all week for questions on fuel. Well, he was the man that invented Fuel Watch. He was going to watch it, but the problem was it collapsed. And then he was worried about grocery prices. He invented Grocery Watch, but then Grocery Watch collapsed. And of course there are a few other collapses when he was a minister, like Timber Corp and a few other financial advisory businesses, Great Southern, there were a whole lot of them, right? There was a few other collapses. And then, of course, there was the collapse of border security. That happened under him as well. How many people came in?
25,000 under him alone.
25,000 people came in on boats when this man, the member for McMahon, was the Minister for Immigration. 25,000 people came on boats unlawfully when he was the Minister for Immigration. And just to cap it all off, for the brief period that he was, in fact, the Treasurer of Australia, after the member for Lilly decided to resign, I'll give him that, he decided to resign, the member for McMahon oversaw an increase in the budget deficit in just a few weeks from $18 billion to $30 billion. $18 billion to $30 billion. See, one of the problems we've got is that Labor committed to years of growing expenditure at an annual increase in excess of 3% for years and years and years. And they did that on the back of promised revenue that never turned up, like the mining tax. That was a great success, the mining tax, another Labor invention. Who on earth would come up with a tax that raises no money? Zero. Well, only the Labor Party could. And then, of course, they said there'll be rivers of gold, because it was the member for Lilly that based his forecast of an $18 billion deficit on the back of iron ore prices twice as high as what they are today. And the member for McMahon had iron ore prices at over $100 a tonne, and today they're $60 a tonne. I tell you what, we'll be fixing up Labor's mess for decades to come.
I call the honourable member for Latrobe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Justice. Will the Minister update the House on what the government is doing to disrupt organised crime in Australia and to stamp out union corruption within the building and construction industry?
I call the honourable member for Justice.
Thanks, Madam Speaker, and can I thank the member for Latrobe for that question. And as a former police officer, he understands that organised crime gangs are an ongoing threat to Australia's security, and this government remains disturbed about the links between those gangs and certain union officials. The Royal Commission into Trade Union Governance has received significant evidence of widespread corruption within the building industry in particular, where union officials either facilitate that corruption or are complicit in those activities. This is particularly evident in Victoria, whose building unions are notorious, and the Prime Minister joined with Premier Napthine on the 30th of October to announce Commonwealth funding for a joint police task force to expose illegal activities within Victoria's unions. This task force of up to 30 Victorian and federal police officers will investigate crimes as revealed by the Royal Commission into Union Corruption, which includes blackmail, extortion, kickbacks, intimidation and cartel behaviour. As the Council assisting the Royal Commission has stated in his submission, and I directly quote, "The evidence in relation to the CFMEU case studies indicate that a number of officials of the CFMEU seek to conduct their affairs with a deliberate and disturbing disregard for the rule of law." He further goes on, "That evidence is suggested of the existence of a pervasive and unhealthy culture within the CFMEU under which the law is to be deliberately avoided and is to be regarded as an irrelevance, where it stands in the way of achieving the union's objectives." This points to a disturbing underbelly within the CFMEU in particular, issues that have been wilfully ignored by previous Labor governments. Indeed, as the Minister for Education pointed out, the previous Labor government abolished the tough cop on the beat, the Australian Building and Construction Commission, the one body that was standing up against corruption within the building industry. Well, this government is determined to get to the bottom of corruption, criminality and organised crime links inside the union movement. The task force will play an essential role in that to make sure that workplaces in Victoria are safe, productive and are run according to the rule of law. Now, despite all this evidence that has been tabled before the Royal Commission, the Victorian Labor Party refuses to cut ties with the convicted criminals within the CFMEU. And if Daniel Andrews were to be elected Premier of Victoria, the most powerful person in Victoria would be the Secretary of the Victorian CFMEU, John Sector. The risk for Victorians is too great, Madam Speaker. Those governing or those aspiring to government should not tolerate criminal activity.
I call the honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Since the election, the government has doubled the deficit, consumer confidence has fallen by 13% and youth unemployment levels are at their highest since October 2001, when the Prime Minister was the Minister for Employment. Will the Prime Minister use his upcoming mini-budget to scrap his unfair budget and just start again?
I call the honourable the Prime Minister.
No.
I call the honourable member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. Will the minister explain to the House how the government determined the efficiency measures at the ABC and SBS, which were announced last Wednesday?
I call the honourable Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I
Hunter.
thank the honourable member for his question. Madam Speaker, it's important to set out clearly the government's process in determining the savings imposed on the ABC and SBS, and to dispel the outrageous claims made by the opposition today. Only today we had out on the doors the Leader of the Opposition and his shadow minister becoming more and more excited as they accused the government of engaging in a vast right-wing conspiracy. There was muttering of grassy knolls. Madam Speaker, the vapours of tremulous indignation was so pumping up the mighty heaving bosom of the Leader of the Opposition, he seemed to grow. He seemed to grow as he denounced our policy. He accused us of being a book-burning government. And as those indignant vapours filled his chest, even his jacket fitted, Madam Speaker. It was incredible. Well, anything was possible. He was so big. And then came the question. So, are you going to restore the funds cut? Ah, Madam Speaker, he slipped back down. He slipped back down into his jacket. Once again, it dwarfed him once again. Madam Speaker, let's be clear. What we did was very simple. We inherited a deficit which Labor said was $18 billion. By the end of last year, by the PFO, just before the election, it was $30 billion. Then after the election and the MAEFO, $48 billion. We inherited a massive deficit. So clearly every part of government had to play its part. Now what we did was businesslike and methodical. We went through the ABC and SBS with the benefit of a real expert, Peter Lewis, one of the most experienced CFOs in the industry, and we identified in the case of the ABC $254 million of savings that could be achieved over 5 years without reducing the money available for programming. And that's what we did. Those savings come from efficiencies. They could have been saved by Labor if they had cared about spending taxpayers' money efficiently, but they did not. And they boasted no government ever spent more on the ABC. They just gave them more and more money, heedless of efficiencies, heedless of the state of the budget, heedless of the fact that every other Australian was pulling his belt in tighter. This was a reckless Labor government, and we are yet again cleaning up its mess.
Prime Minister has the call.
The Phantom's missed the call.
The Minister had finished his question. Is it relating to the question? Well, then that's too late for the point of order. Well, in that case, the Prime Minister, or rather the Minister, has asked for the tabling of the report to which the Minister referred. He wasn't reading from it. The Minister has said it's confidential. The Prime Minister has the call.
I ask that further questions be placed to